A new intelligence update from the UK Ministry of Defence says Russia is likely to have increased its armoured assaults around the town of Marinka in eastern Ukraine in the last week, which has been fought over since 2014, of course. Well, let's bring in our military analyst, retired Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell. Sean, let's talk first of all and give our viewers an idea of the situation on the ground as it stands right now in Ukraine.
The fighting continues across a whole 1,200-kilometre front line. As you say, Marinka has been particularly interesting just down to the south there. The Russians conducting an armoured assault there. But it's worth pointing out, as you say, they've been fighting there since 2014, and the Russians have, in 9 years, have made just over 2 kilometres progress. So it's painfully slow, the progress. The other areas of Avdiivka and Bakhmut up to the north, again, there's been dozens of attacks over the last 24 hours there, but the rate of attacks is definitely diminishing. The Russian offensive is definitely losing momentum. A couple of other bits of news interesting. The Wagner Group, if you remember, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who ran that, was getting a bit too influential, so the Russians stopped him recruiting convicts to bolster his military. But President Putin probably recognises that Russian society probably cares less about convicts losing their lives than their very own conscripts. So the Russian MOD, the Russian army, is now recruiting convicts itself, trying to put them under 18-month contracts. An interesting development. And also Russian concerns about the impact of Western battle tanks supporting Ukraine when their offensive starts. The Russians are now under a bonus scheme where if they are able to damage or destroy a NATO-provisioned tank, they will be financially recompensed. So we'll expect to hear a lot more of this in the media as it plays out once the Ukrainian offensive starts.
Interesting moves from President Putin there. Well, let's zoom out a bit. And I understand the Russian defence minister is visiting Belarus. Why do you think that is?
Sergei Shoigu is today visiting Belarus. It's at face value. We understand this is because Belarus is seeking security guarantees because it's worried that if it does get attacked, will Russia come to its aid? The trouble is, if you look behind the scenes here, first of all, Ukraine has neither the military capability nor the intent to actually start to take on Belarus. And NATO is a defensive organisation. So it's very difficult to see where the threat actually lies. And almost certainly, this is about Russian political control. The Russians have used military force to take, or try to take Ukraine. They're using political force to try to take Belarus. And we're seeing the two, obviously Shoigu in his military uniform and President Lukashenko's sat there. The Russians have been doing military training in Belarus. They've been basing military aircraft there. They've been basing tactical nuclear weapons there. Now they're talking about providing security guarantees. All of this is putting more and more Russian soldiers onto Belarusian soil. It's a form of Russian invasion, but by stealth.
OK, now I want to get your take on the fact that some classified US documents have been released. What do you make of that, Sean?
Yeah, the news was breaking over the last week. Over 100 US documents appeared on the internet, some of them marked as top secret. They carried a whole load of information about Ukrainian capability, the readiness states, the impact of Western weapons, the state of the weather, how that might impact the war, etc. But what's worth putting into context here is the West normally embeds the media in with the military. That's not the case because we're not directly involved in the war this time around. So what the US and UK are trying to do is to classify information so it can get it out to the media to help inform that. And most of the information that appears in most of these documents isn't in itself secret. What's secret is the way that information was found. So, for example, how many Russian tanks are available on the battlefield today? That number is interesting, but it's not particularly secret. But how you find out how many there were, that becomes much more sensitive. So leaks of documents and data like this, whilst it's interesting, the authorities will be less concerned with the actual data that's out there, but more concerned about the sources of that data than the need to preserve those.
Yeah, absolutely. Retired Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell, thanks very much indeed.